I used to believe HR was the safest place in the building, the department that promised fairness, protection, and confidential support. But the day I filed my report, I learned that HR isn't always a shield. Sometimes it's the sharpened knife behind your back. It started with something small, almost invisible. A tiny inconsistency hidden inside a routine compliance file. I wasn't even supposed to be reviewing it. I had picked it up only because everyone else was too busy with the acquisition. That should have been my first warning. When a deal is worth hundreds of millions, silence becomes a strategy. What I found wasn't loud. It didn't jump off the page or glow red. Corruption in the real world rarely does. It whispers. It hides in patterns, duplicate payments, delayed signatures, an authorization code that didn't match the department who supposedly issued it. Small things, too small to cause panic, but just big enough to bother someone like me. I followed the trail quietly, professionally, the way compliance people are trained to move slow, careful, invisible. The deeper I looked, the colder my stomach became. These weren't mistakes. They were intentional. Someone wanted the acquisition numbers to look flawless. So flawless they would trigger record-breaking bonuses for the executive tier, and I knew exactly what I had to. I filed the report, calmly, through the official secure channel HR repeatedly reminded us was safe and protected. 2 days later, HR called me in. The moment I stepped into Clara's office, the head of HR, I knew something was wrong. She gave me a smile so polished it felt like a threat wrapped in lipstick. "Thanks for coming," she said, shutting the door quietly behind me. The click of the lock echoed deeper than it should have. She didn't offer me a seat. She didn't ask how I was. She went straight to it. "I reviewed your report," she said, tapping her finger on the folder. "And I need you to understand something. You're overthinking this." Overthinking. That's what they say when they want you to doubt your own proof. My pulse tightened, but I stood still. The irregularities are documented. They're factual. Clara sighed, almost pitying me. "You're a talented analyst. But sometimes digging too deep can make work complicated. Complicated. Another polished word for dangerous." Then she said it softly, slowly, like she was giving friendly advice instead of a warning. "For your own good, let this go." In that moment, everything inside me went silent. Because HR wasn't protecting. HR was protecting someone else. Someone powerful. And they needed me to disappear quietly, but I don't. Disappear. Not when the truth is staring me in the face. Not when someone thinks they can bury me along with my report. That was the day I realized something terrifying. HR wasn't trying to guide me, they were trying to erase me. When I walked out of Clara's office that day, the hallway felt colder than usual, too quiet, too watchful. It was the kind of silence that settles right before something breaks. I could feel it pressing against my ribs, telling me I had stepped into a place people weren't supposed to stand. I returned to my desk, pretending everything was normal. But the moment I logged in, the first sign appeared. Access denied. My compliance folder, my own work, was suddenly locked. A file I created, a file only I had clearance for. That was when I knew HR wasn't just warning me, they had already begun the clean dash up. I kept my expression neutral, my hands steady on the keyboard. No panic, no calls, no emails. In corporate warfare, the first one to react loses. So I stayed still, watching the digital walls close around me. By noon, the rumors started, whispers about me acting strangely, colleagues giving me sideways glances, a manager asking if I was feeling overwhelmed lately. Classic HR. Groundwork. Build a narrative before the target even knows they're being targeted. I kept my smile soft and calm, let them underestimate me, let them think I was scared. But inside, something colder was forming, a quiet resolve. HR might have controlled the system, but they didn't control my memory. I had everything committed to detail. Dates, amounts, initials, timestamps. They could bury the files. But they couldn't bury what I already knew. The truth stayed with me. The next morning, Clara called me again. Same soft tone, same plastic smile. I just want to check in, she said. You've seemed tense. Double quotes. Tense. A word they use before they write you up for behavior. I tilted my head slightly. Just focused on work. Her smile stiffened. Good. That's what I like to hear. And remember, drop the report. We've handled it. Handled it, meaning destroyed. Altered or locked away, meaning someone in the executive tier was already thanking her quietly. I left the room feeling a strange mix of fear and clarity. Fear because I was now isolated. Clarity because isolation means you're close to the truth. Later that afternoon, my closest coworker, Maya, pulled me aside. She looked around first, as if the walls had ears. I don't know what's going on, she whispered, but HR asked me if you've been unstable lately. Unstable, the next step in the retaliation playbook. I felt the air shift. HR was building a case, not solving one. They're trying to erase the report, I murmured. And me along with it. Maya blinked hard. Why? What was in it? I hesitated, not because I didn't trust her, but because I didn't want to drag her into it, the kind of thing senior people don't want discovered before bonuses. She inhaled sharply. Then you need to be careful. I nodded. But the decision was already made in my mind. Careful wasn't enough. Anymore. I needed to be strategic. I went home that evening with one thought circling my mind like a storm. If HR was burying my report, then I had to create one they couldn't bury, not in the system, not behind locked folders, and not inside their controlled channels. Something off-grid, something undeniable, something that, once revealed, would ripple through the entire company. I didn't plan to survive their retaliation. I planned to end it. The next week didn't feel like work, it felt like surveillance. Every step I took inside that building echoed differently, like the floors themselves were warning me to turn back. People who used to greet me with warm nods suddenly avoided eye contact. Meetings I was normally included in were accidentally skipped. My workload was quietly shifted to junior analysts, as if I were already being phased out. I wasn't imagining it. This was the retaliation phase, silent, precise, procedural, and then came the email. Cold, clinical, from HR. Mandatory well-being evaluation. Please schedule immediately. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. I knew exactly what this meant. HR had begun crafting their narrative, that I was unstable, stressed, unreliable. A well-being eval was the pretext they needed to question my credibility. Once that seed was planted, anything I said afterward could be dismissed as emotional, exaggerated, or misinterpreted. They weren't just trying to bury my report, they were trying to bury me, but I didn't flinch. If they wanted a psychological chess match. They chose the wrong opponent that night. I sat at my kitchen table long after midnight, staring at my notebook filled with every detail I'd discovered. Dates, signatures, vendor codes, altered timestamps, evidence HR couldn't scrub from my mind. And slowly a plan began to take shape, sharp and methodical. I wouldn't fight HR directly. That was a losing battle. Instead, I would go above them, straight to the people they feared the most, the audit committee and the board. But to reach them, I needed something stronger than a digital report or flagged anomalies. I needed a weapon HR couldn't erase, even if they burned the server room to the ground. So I built it, late at night, off the clock, on my personal device. I compiled everything, screenshots from before my access was revoked, confirmations from the vendor system logs, archived email headers, phone call records of suspicious urgent approvals, and my own handwritten timeline connecting all the dots. I built an independent compliance dossier, one no one knew existed. But as I worked, the pressure inside the office intensified. 2 days later, my direct manager called me in. He closed the door gently, but his eyes were cold. HR mentioned some concerns, he said, stirring his coffee unnecessarily. They said you've been tense, distracted. There it was again, that word. Tense. Their favorite weapon. I'm fine, I replied calmly. He nodded, pretending to accept it. But the fear in his eyes wasn't for me, was for himself. HR had clearly told him to distance himself. When I walked out of his office, I saw Clara down the hall. She was watching me. Not openly, not in an obvious way, but with the subtle scanning look of someone checking if the problem had been contained. Except I wasn't contained. I was preparing to strike. The following morning, security approached my desk. "We need to escort you to HR." A quiet chill spread through the office as heads lifted from screens. Everyone knew what that meant. You don't get escorted unless something is very, very wrong. Unless HR wants people to think it is. As I walked through the hallway, I felt every gaze. Some sympathetic, some curious, some relieved it wasn't their turn. Clara was waiting with that same glossy smile. "Compliance concerns have escalated," she said sweetly. "We're placing you on temporary leave until we finish our review." Temporary leave, the polite corporate phrase for "we don't want you in the building." My heart hammered, but not from fear, from certainty. They were close to eliminating me, which meant I had no more time to wait. I looked Clara straight in the eyes. "Thank you for letting me know," I said softly. I watched her smile falter. Just a flicker, because she wasn't expecting calm. She was expecting panic. I left the building without a single word to anyone. But inside me, something cold and razor-sharp clicked into place. HR thought they had cornered me. HR thought I had no leverage. HR thought burying the report meant burying the truth. They were wrong. Now that they pushed me out, I was finally free to expose everything. 4. Betrayal. The day they tried to break me completely, approximately 4,000 characters, when HR put me on temporary leave, they expected me to disappear quietly. They expected embarrassment, fear, maybe even tears. What they didn't expect was that the moment I stepped out of that building, every mask they'd been hiding behind would begin to crack. But betrayal never arrives only once. It comes in waves. And mine hit the second I reached home. My company email had been disabled. My access badge remotely deactivated. My internal portal account erased. Not suspended. Not frozen. Erased. HR wasn't reviewing anything, they were eliminating my existence from the system. The message was clear. If I had no access, I had no proof. And no voice. But their mistake was assuming everything I had lived through existed only inside their servers. It didn't. The next betrayal came in a phone call. My manager. "I'm just checking in," he said, voice trembling with guilt. "HR told the team you've been struggling mentally, and that we should keep our distance while they sort everything out." My throat went tight. Not from pain, from recognition. They were executing the oldest corporate strategy. Discredit the whistleblower before the whistleblower speaks. I kept my voice steady. "So that's the official line?" He hesitated. "They said you were seeing things that weren't there." The irony almost made me laugh. I was the only one who saw clearly. When I hung up, I felt something inside me settle, a quiet, icy acceptance. HR wasn't just retaliating. They were rewriting reality. And they were confident enough to assume no one would question their version. The final betrayal came later that evening. Maya messaged me in a panic. HR met with the team. They said you fabricated compliance issues. They're calling it a performance concern. Fabricated. The word hit harder than anything else. Not mistaken. Not misinterpreted. Fabricated. That meant they were preparing a full case against me. One they could use to justify termination. Dismiss any accusations I made afterward. And protect whoever was benefiting from the altered acquisition numbers. It wasn't a cover-up anymore. It was a purge. I sat in the dim light of my apartment, staring at the message. The betrayal wasn't surprising. I knew HR would strike back. What stunned me was the speed, the planning, the confidence. They had done this before. They had perfected the process. Bury the report. Discredit the analyst. Protect the bonus pool. In that moment, the fear I'd been carrying all week finally evaporated. Not because I was brave, but because I understood something essential. HR was no longer fighting me. They were fighting the truth. And the truth didn't need a badge or a server login. It just needed the right audience. I picked up my notebook, the off-grid dossier I'd been building piece by piece. It wasn't polished. It wasn't formatted. But it was real. Dates, names, vendor IDs. Irregular approvals. The pattern of manipulation so clean and so intentional that even the board couldn't ignore it. Betrayal had pushed me out of the building. But that distance was exactly what I needed. I thought they cornered me. What they didn't realize was that they'd freed me from every restriction, every protocol, every chain they controlled. I finally understood the depth of what they had done. And I finally understood what I had to do in return. They buried my report. So I would create one they couldn't bury, one that wouldn't just expose the truth, but destroy every bonus they were trying so desperately to protect. The night after HR declared war on my reputation, I sat alone at my kitchen table with my dossier spread out like a battlefield map. Every note, every timestamp, every altered signature stared back at me like silent witnesses waiting to be called. HR thought taking my badge would end my power. They forgot something important. Truth doesn't need access. It just needs direction. I knew I couldn't go through internal channels anymore. Those were controlled by the same people who wanted me erased. To fight HR, I needed to go above HR, above my manager. Above every executive tied to their bonuses. I needed the audit committee. The board, the people. HR couldn't manipulate, but reaching them directly without exposing myself too soon required precision. If I sent my evidence the wrong way, HR would intercept it, twist it, and label it as emotional retaliation. I needed a path they couldn't track. So I built one. First, I created a clean, chronological version of the dossier, simple, factual, airtight. No emotion. No speculation. Just the truth laid out like a trail of corporate breadcrumbs. Then I backed it up to 3 encrypted drives, each hidden in a different place. One in my apartment, one in a safe deposit box, and one entrusted to the only person I knew HR couldn't intimidate, my aunt, a retired federal auditor who had seen more corporate corruption than I could imagine. Next, I prepared the delivery. I drafted a formal, concise letter addressed to the audit committee chairwoman known for her intolerance toward financial manipulation. She didn't play favorites. She didn't bow to executives. Her nickname inside the company was the Guillotine. If anyone would cut through this mess, it was her. Then I crafted a separate, shorter memo for the board's legal counsel. Just enough to open a file. Just enough to force them to look deeper. Just enough to make sure HR couldn't hide anything. Once the inquiry began, but the most important part of my plan wasn't the dossier or the letters. It was the timing. I waited until payroll week, the week when all bonus certifications were due to be finalized. The perfect moment. Executives get reckless when money is on the line. And the audit committee becomes alert when the numbers look too perfect. At 7:14 a.m. on Monday. While HR was busy preparing their narrative about my instability, I went to a private courier. No email, no digital trace. A sealed packet sent directly to the audit chair's personal office with signature confirmation required. Nothing HR could intercept, not without exposing themselves. Then I sent the legal memo printed, sealed, and dropped into the board's confidential mailbox inside the lobby. A box only the board's assistant had access to. By the time I stepped back outside, I felt something strange. Calm. Cold, steady calm. Because I knew the fuse had been lit. And HR didn't even know it yet. The last piece of my plan was simple. Remain silent. Silence scares people like Clara. When a target goes quiet, they start wondering what's coming. They start making mistakes. They start revealing panic in places they normally keep polished. So I turned my phone off, closed my laptop, and waited. HR had buried my report. But now, my report was on its way to the only people they feared, and this time they couldn't bury anything. The silence broke 3 days later. It began with a single phone call, an unfamiliar number, sharp and official. I answered, already knowing this wasn't HR. "This is Marin Locke," the woman said. "Audit committee chair, the Guillotine." Her voice held the weight of someone used to ending careers before breakfast. I received your packet. I need you to come in. No greetings. No reassurances. Just the sound of a sword being unsheathed. When I walked into the building the next morning, security didn't escort me to HR. They escorted me to the executive floor somewhere. HR had no jurisdiction. Clara saw me pass from across the lobby. Her smile collapsed in real time. That was the first crack. Inside a glass-walled conference room, the audit chair and 2 external investigators sat waiting. A recorder was placed on the table. A thick binder, my binder sat in front of them. My handwriting. My timelines. My evidence. We will ask questions, Marin said. Answer directly. Leave nothing out. And I didn't. I laid out everything. The signatures that didn't match. The vendor payments processed during system downtime. The executive approvals that appeared seconds apart, as if someone had stamped them all at once. Then the moment came, the one I had waited for. Who did you report this to internally? Marin asked. My throat tightened. HR? And their response? I looked straight into her eyes. They locked my access. Reassigned my work. Spread rumors that I was unstable. Then placed me on leave. The investigators exchanged a look. Not surprised, angry. That was the second crack. Then Marin opened another folder, HR's version of the story. It was thin. Too thin. A badly assembled file claiming I'd misinterpreted routine variances and exhibited emotional distress. Their narrative was weak enough to collapse under its own weight. Did HR contact you after placing you on leave? She asked. Yes, they informed my team I fabricated compliance concerns. That was it. The room froze. Marin's jaw tightened. Fabricated, she repeated softly, like the word itself offended her. She slid HR's file aside like it was trash. Because it was. What happened next unfolded faster than I expected. HR was summoned to the executive floor, Clara included. I didn't leave the conference room. They wanted me there. They wanted me to watch. Clara walked in looking composed. She walked out looking hunted. The audit committee interrogated her for nearly an hour. I could hear every raised voice through the door. Why was her access revoked? Who authorized the alteration of her report file? Why are there no records of your follow-up investigation? Why does your timeline contradict the system logs? Her answers crumbled one by one. She had no documentation. No timestamps. No consistency. HR had cleaned up too quickly, leaving fingerprints everywhere. That was the third crack, the one that split everything open. By noon, HR's director was called in. By 1, the CFO joined, pale, sweating, furious. Because he knew.
He knew exactly what this meant.
And by 2 o'clock, the building felt like it was holding its breath. Executives pacing. Assistants whispering. Doors slamming. The kind of silence that forms right before something erupts. Then Marin stepped into the hallway with a stack of printed sheets, my dossier at the top. Prepare the full inquiry, she ordered. Effective immediately. And just like that, the facade HR had carefully built shattered. Their narrative died. Their protection vanished. Their power dissolved. I watched Clara sink into a chair, her face hollow. She finally understood the truth. HR had buried my report. I had buried their entire bonus pool. But the climax wasn't the investigation itself. It was what happened next when Marin turned to me, her voice calm and commanding. You're reinstated effective tomorrow, she said. And HR is officially removed from anything involving you. A storm of footsteps echoed as executives rushed to contain the fallout. HR's reign of polished lies was collapsing floor by floor. And I stood there in the middle of it all, no longer erased, no longer silent, no longer afraid. My dossier had detonated exactly where it needed to. The truth was out. The inquiry was live. And the people who tried to break me were about to face consequences they couldn't bury. In the days that followed, the building felt different, lighter, sharper, honest in a way I hadn't realized it never was. For the first time, people didn't avoid me. They watched me, quietly, curiously, some even with a flicker of respect. Like they suddenly remembered I had survived a storm they didn't dare walk into. The audit committee moved fast. Faster than I ever imagined. HR's files were seized. System logs were extracted. Every altered approval, every manipulated timestamp, every missing follow-up was pulled into the light like bones dug out of the ground. And the truth was impossible to argue with. The bonuses, the ones they tried so desperately to protect, were frozen, entirely, pending a full investigation. That alone would have been enough for me. But consequences don't stop once truth starts unraveling. Clara was escorted out first. No smile, no clipboard, no control. Just a silent walk through the lobby she once ruled. HR's director followed 2 days later. And when the CFO's resignation hit the internal bulletin, the entire floor fell silent like someone had dropped a match into gasoline. None of them looked at me on their way out. They didn't need to. They knew exactly why they were leaving. When Marin called me back into her office, she didn't use her usual sharp tone. She simply said, "You were right. And you were brave enough to act when others weren't." I didn't feel proud. I felt steady, clean, like I had finally stepped out of a fog I didn't realize was suffocating me. They reinstated me with back pay, gave me full control of the compliance review process for the quarter. And for the first time, no one questioned my judgment. No one whispered behind my back. No one tried to make me small. But the real resolution wasn't in the titles regained or the apologies sent through stiff corporate emails. It was in the silence. New silence. Not the cold, watchful one from before. A peaceful silence, the kind that follows after everything false has burned away. I survived their retaliation. I survived their lies, and I walked back into that building not as the person they tried to erase, but as the person who exposed them. The lesson was clear, and it cut deeper than any HR memo or corporate threat ever could. Truth cannot be silenced. Systems can be manipulated. Titles can be wielded like weapons. Bonuses can be protected with polished lies. But evidence, facts, they have a life of their own. When someone tries to erase you for standing up, it's not just a test of courage, it's a test of strategy, patience, and resolve. I realized that the quietest weapons are often the strongest. A hidden dossier, a precise plan, and timing aligned with consequences no one can hide from. That's how real justice unfolds. In the end, retaliation may seem powerful, but calculated truth, that always wins. I didn't just survive HR's assault. I exposed the rot. I reclaimed control. And I learned a final truth: when systems try to bury integrity, integrity fights back. Silently, relentlessly, and ultimately victoriously.